Welcome to the Team EF Coaching Performance Podcast, where we take information from the highest level of sport and make it accessible for all cyclists. I'm your host, Zach Morris, and in this episode, I sit down with Coach Matt Shallcrass to discuss the evolution of the sport of cycling, how riders are changing the way they're training, and how you as an athlete can take some of the things that are happening at the top level of sport and apply it to what you have going on, no matter where you are in your cycling journey. Matt has had an amazing career as a coach, winning multiple medals at the Olympic Games with the Canadian national team and a 5-year career working with the New Zealand national team. We are so happy to have Matt Shallcrass as part of Team EF Coaching's elite team of coaches, and this episode is packed with information that you can take and apply to your cycling game. So jump into it and enjoy the episode. All right, ladies and gentlemen, everybody please welcome Matt Shallcrass to the show. Matt, welcome. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good, Zach. Great to be on your show, mate. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's our show. You're part of the team. You're our newest coach at Team EF Coaching. We're really happy to have you on board. You're down in New Zealand, right?
Yep, down in New Zealand, and super stoked to be working with EF Coaching. And, you know, it's a great opportunity for me and super excited moving forward.
That is awesome. Is it offensive to call people from New Zealand a Kiwi?
No, that's what we prefer.
Oh, really? So you guys actually like it?
Yeah, it's more offensive if you call us Australian.
Well, I could see how that would be offensive.
Yeah.
So you were working over in Canada not too long ago, right, on the track?
Yep. Yeah, I did the last 2.5 years in Canada. So from 2019, I picked up a contract through the Tokyo Olympics, and then obviously with the COVID delay, it led to another year and a bit of working with them. So yeah, ended up with the women's team through the Tokyo Olympics, which was a pretty exciting journey and a great challenge that I enjoyed.
What was that like? What was it like prepping the ladies to go to the Olympics?
It was amazing. It was challenging at the start. They were in a really funky space with just their culture and some of the issues going on in the program. So going into that and having to try and turn it around and change, I guess, the attitude and the philosophy to training was a challenge, but it was so rewarding. I mean, the girls were amazing people and great athletes, and the Canadian staff, they're so similar to Kiwis that you just fit it in pretty easily, and we had an amazing time.
It's funny that you mentioned culture. So I can comment on this because I'm Canadian, but I always say that Canada doesn't really have its own unique culture like anywhere because we're really such a diverse country, right? Like that's one of the best things about Canada is we have people from all over the world in masses, but it's kind of like absorbed the traditional Canadian culture, and we don't really have like a Canadian way of doing almost anything outside of playing hockey. And so I'm not surprised to hear that we had a little bit of a weird culture going on in our Canadian track program, but I'm glad you were able to get in there and sort them out. We got a bunch of medals at the last Olympics. That was amazing. So you were doing something right over there.
Yeah, we had a great games, and when you reflect, you know, the whole team did so well with the sprint girls getting gold and bronze, and even the men's team pursuit. I don't think they had been to the Olympics since maybe the 30s, and for them to qualify and finish 5th was awesome. So, and then obviously my team was 4th, so we did really well, and we all set personal records, and it's just the competition's just gone to another level. So it was a phenomenal experience to see how much the bar had raised in a 4-year cycle, probably the biggest jump in Olympics so far on the track.
Yeah, it was incredible. The rate of improvement over there was shocking. And
yeah,
is that a fact? Like that's the biggest jump we've seen in a long time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
That was huge. Like normally you would see the world record might progress by 1 to 1.5%, or 2 seconds from worlds the previous year, and we had on the women's side it jumped by 6 seconds. And there was four teams that all went under the previous world record at the Olympics, which generally on the women's side, we might only see 1 or 2 be able to do that. And we had 5 do that. And on the men, you had 4 teams going under 50. And it was just super huge changes on that side, which was, unreal. And even behind the scenes was amazing. It was so tense, and there was so many arguments and finger pointing over equipment and cheating, and it was just this whole vacuum that really just amplified the Olympics that previous coaches I'd spoken to at previous games just had not experienced that level of intensity and arguing around equipment, and seeing record times just shatter every time someone stepped on the track.
So you mean arguments beyond like sock height, length, and these sorts of things that are like very surface level that everybody knows about? Like what were the biggest differentiators, do you think? Like what made the game so much more competitive this year? Was it equipment? Was it training? What was it?
Yeah, I think like on the men's side, it was the equipment shifts. Like the men generally have started to figure out the game in terms of they've got a greater depth of talent. They're riding bigger gears, and the training's been pretty much dialed in. But it was the shift of the equipment, the double layered skin suits, the bars, putting tape on the leading edge of your bike to kind of cut some wind flow down, and things that were really pushing the boundary there. And then on the female side, I think the equipment contributed a lot, but also into the third cycle of 4-person team pursuit 4K, so people are starting to figure out what the training needs to look like for the girls, and we're getting a greater depth of females that are able to contribute to those times. So it's kind of, I'd say boys was equipment shift and girls was training and understanding that discipline better for them.
You blew past it there, and I'll share the details with everybody. The double layered skin suit. So for anybody that doesn't know about it, what pro cyclists are doing now is they're wearing a base layer or something like that with some different variations in height to it, like dimpling, or a lot of them are like straight rubber lines. And then they wear a smooth piece of fabric over top of it. And I think this study was originally done by Adidas. It was funded by Adidas way back in early 2010s. Is that true, Matt? Do you know?
I wouldn't know that off the top of my head, but I had heard Adidas had something looking into it for that for sure. And I think a lot of the indoor speed skating have done a lot of research around it as well.
I think the breakthrough in the cycling space came from one of the directors of the performance director at Ineos. His name's not coming to me right now. But he sent me the whole study on it, and it was done in Denmark. The research was done in Denmark. They originally developed it for like the last split seconds of running on the track where the runners would reach over 40 kilometers an hour. And so that's where the whole kind of concept came from. And then this guy at Ineos, he was part of that board monitoring that study, and so he took it and applied it to cycling, and now everybody's pretty much doing it. That's the latest on the aero trap hidden base layers. So new base layers. What else? New equipment. What else was making these big differences?
Yeah, I just think also they just changed the way we rode. Like there was a huge emphasis on riding bigger gears now and starting a lot quicker. So especially in the team pursuit side of things, it's like you're training almost like a sprinter, and rather than being a full endurance-based athlete, you start doing high intensity or intermittent efforts more regularly in your training, and you want to develop your torque profile and your front end power. And a lot of their guys might still do some 200K rides, but they're less frequent than what they were, say, in Rio or in London or in Beijing, and it's more about that shorter, sharper intensity. And really attacking the race. And they really suited Denmark's style. Unfortunately, they didn't get the win, but if you watch their transition over the previous cycle, they were just going out the first 2K, first 3K dying, but really being super aggressive and trying to overspeed the ride as much as possible, and then let the gear run out and kind of hold at the back end. And then there's some good shifts in challenging the traditional way of thinking in terms of the lap strategies. How many laps a person does on a pull, how many times do they see the front of the team pursuit. And there's some shifts around that as well, which just changed, I guess, the efficiency of their team a lot more as well, which was quite exciting to see.
So from a physiological standpoint, they were bigger gear in the beginning, right? So all muscular strength, just muscle in the gear. And then you said they're spinning it out at the end?
Yeah, so what they're trying to do is just get the gear. They're spinning the first kind of like 4 or 5 laps, just getting as much overspeed as they can on the gear. So getting the cadence as high as possible, and then you're going to get a decline to an extent, and they're just trying to minimize that decline as much as possible. So almost overspeed it so you feel like the gear's easy, and then when it comes back to bite you, you've still got a little bit of cadence in the legs, and hopefully there's only a few more laps left in the race. And that's where the strategy of who does the big turns at what point. And Italy really nailed it with Ghana. They knew, hey man, this dude's going to do 4 laps at the end because he's the only one that can reaccelerate the gear and do 700 watts on the front for a minute. And that's exactly what he did pretty much, and destroyed everyone.
That's crazy. He did 700 watts per minute at the end?
Wow, that would be my guess. I mean, I don't know the full data, but looking at the size of them and the speed they're going, it's like it's got to be up around there, knowing some of the guys that I knew in the Kiwi team are around 620, 630 for their pulls on the front, and they're slightly smaller guys. So he has to be around that number somewhere. It's unreal.
He's got big levers. So hold on.
Yeah.
People might already be overwhelmed by what we're talking about on this podcast here. A lot of information in a short period of time. So Matt, why don't you give us a little bit of a background? You obviously, this is a pretty high level conversation. You obviously had to go to school and figure some things out to be able to talk like this. So what's your story? Like where did you come from?
Yeah. So I did a lot of I used to race bikes myself, but was never gifted enough to probably make a career of it. So made a decision pretty early on that I wanted to, follow my passion in sport. Knew that coaching or sports science was probably my avenue. So I went to university and did an undergrad degree, and then followed it up with a master's in exercise physiology, where I looked at the effect of blood-brain flow on your breathing and your thermoregulation and exercise. So we had to kind of delve into some pretty cool physiology there, and that led me into the coaching realm, where I was able to pick up some athletes and look at things a little differently and apply probably a more precise scientific approach. And went from there and managed to get picked up into the New Zealand national team as a coach there for 5 years. And then when that finished up, obviously jumped across to Canada, and that's got me where it has today. So it's been 10 years coaching, and prior to that was probably 6-7 years of study. So it's been a bit of a journey for me for sure.
It's really interesting, in the professional sports side of things, we have like both sides of it. We have the scholars, and then we have the people who went through the school of hard knocks and raced their bike for 20 years at the highest level, and both kind of come together and just continue to make things better. So when you came out of school, how do you feel like all that hard work you put in school helped you make a difference in the sport? Like, what were you doing? How did you apply it?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey. Like, it was more because I'd gone to school and probably didn't have some of the hard knock lessons. I just was more open to challenge the thinking, and I wasn't kind of set in a way of this is how we've got to train, this is how we've got to do it. I just looked at the problem differently and thought, well, if this is the demand for the sport, how can we apply a scientific principle to maximize that or overshoot the demand so we become more efficient and effective in the role? So it took a lot of challenging conversations with the athletes, a lot of failures on my behalf, trying stuff that just didn't work, and also acknowledging the history of the sport and the past generations of people who've come before me, and knowing, hey, they've got some fantastic ideas that have worked. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to maybe ask some critical questions and apply a critical thinking model to what we're trying to achieve was how I went about it.
Have you ran into anything since you've been working on the practical side of it that just doesn't make any sense scientifically?
Yeah, there's always stuff like that. Like, how can a guy produce all this power and win multiple road races, and then they come to the track and they can't do anything about it? It just doesn't translate. Or how can someone that doesn't train that well at all and doesn't tolerate training load go and win world titles? And I've seen both, and there's no explanation for it apart from it just is what it is.
Just rock up on race day with a whole different mentality.
Yeah, I think that's it for sure.
So coming from the track background, you've had a lot of exposure to different types of athletes just in that kind of small environment where, there's clear difference between like endurance athletes and sprint athletes on the track. And then what we see is, obviously the endurance guys are more of the explosive riders in the real endurance side of the sport, which would be like road racing, right? So What's kind of like your perspective on the different style of athletes that exist in the track? Like how from a physiological perspective and a training perspective, like what separates the sprinters from the endurance riders, and then what separates the endurance riders from the ones who go out and are able to perform well in the ultra endurance events like the road racing?
Yeah, it's a fascinating discussion, that one. And I mean, I think the clear differentiation between the sprinters and endurance is quite easy to pick. You know, the sprint guys are, you know, bigger, heavier guys are 90 kilos plus. They're just that, you know, 10 to 20 second all out effort. They're done. They need to lie on the side of the track for another half an hour to recover, regenerate, and get going again. And then that's really clear cut. You can see massive differences in the just physical shape of them. And it's really easy to differentiate that. When you have the endurance guys on the track and then jumping to compare them to the road, like what we see on the track is they're often more explosive from that kind of 30 seconds through to 2 to 3 minute mark. And they can hold quite high powers quite well, and they're generally quite good at clearing the lactate. So we see a good ability to produce a big effort for a long period of time, you know, 3 to 4 minutes, clear the lactate, recover quickly, and go again, because that's really what you need to be able to do on the track. You know, because you can't freewheel, there's no opportunity to really drop the watts away.
So if you're listening at home and you don't have access to like testing yourself with lactate, like how would you know you're good at that?
You just do 4 minute effort or a 3 minute effort, have a short break where you're still pedaling along the road at a reasonable clip, and then try it again. And
see if you can do it.
And you would find, yeah, and I mean, on the road, you can just set a mark. You're like, right, I'm going to go from this lamppost to that lamppost as hard as I can, or, you know, as solidly as I can, and then I'm going to turn around, ride back easy, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. And you'll find that, man, after 2, I'm dead. After 5, I'm good, you know, and you can kind of hack it that way as well. Right. This is a pretty easy way. But then you see the track guys have that ability to produce high power quickly, recover and repeat it. And when they switch to the, you know, the road guys or those extended endurance, you know, they have to be a bit smarter and sit in the bunch a little bit longer, and it takes them, you know, they're good in the one-day races, but we might see over the Grand Tours they struggle a little bit more in that second and third week, just because that back-end endurance might not be as resilient as the road guys that do it day in, day out. But when it comes to a sprint or a small breakaway or a bunch kick, then the track guys are generally pretty good. And we see it in guys like, you know, I think Benjamin Thomas had a great Tour de France this year where we saw him having a go and was trying to make go of it. And he's obviously a really good trackie as well. So, I guess one-day races and short bunch sprints, they're pretty dangerous.
Well, the
Grand Tour stuff, it takes a little bit more work.
The guy who won the Commonwealth Games, I think he just picked up a race over in Europe as well. What's his name? Sam?
Yeah, Aaron Gate.
Aaron Gate. Yeah, Aaron Gate.
Yeah.
He was pretty impressive there. He's track rider, right?
Yeah, he's phenomenal, but he's had a really interesting career as well. So he's come into track at a young age and was successful at the Olympics in London. He picked up a bronze in the team pursuit. Then he went to go chase the road as well. So he spent some time on the road and leaned out a little bit, dropped a little bit of the muscle mass that he had gained from the track, and rode for there was Chain Reaction, it was the Irish team, and then he signed with Aqua Blue and did the Vuelta with Aqua Blue, and then he's got a little bit unlucky with some road contracts and came back to the track, and he just dominated those games. And he's a little bit older, but I think the power is now matched to his long-term endurance ability. So he's just so dominant in what he wants to do now.
But what's so interesting about this for me is, you know, these more explosive riders now are getting better and better and better at making it over the climbs, right? So why is that? Why are these endurance riders on the track, who are still typically in the roadside explosive athletes, why are they getting so much better at making it over the climbs? What's changing?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of the training we're doing. So we did a lot of climbing repeatability in our training. So we're getting used to actually holding good torques and good powers on the climb. So when we come into a road race, they're able to sustain higher power for longer now than previously they wouldn't. They would kind of just spin at the back instead of it. Like we would do 15, 20-minute efforts on the hill at a really high torque value and try and be, you know, above that demand in terms of the TP for power and So when they're coming to the hill race, as long as there's no massive attacks, they can actually sit in the bunch a little bit better now and sustain what's been thrown at them. And they're just able to grind through it a bit more than what probably previously they'd done in the past, where we might have been more reliant on a higher cadence to get over the climb.
So can you just clear that up for everybody? What would be a higher torque value?
Yeah, so like in the team pursuit, the torque might be around, girls, it's low 30 Newton meters, and for the boys, it's in the 40s. So if we're doing repeated climbs on the hill, we're looking at the girls going over to 45, 50 Newton meters. So we're really trying to overshoot that demand. And for the boys, it's up around that 60, 70 Newton meters, which would equate to, your 450, 500 watts for the guys. And for the girls, it'd be, around your 350, 370s watts for the girls as well.
So if I was going on my ride today, how would I achieve that if I wanted to go and train 60 Newton meters of torque?
Yeah, so you got to drop the cadence. So we really want to drop the cadence right down to, 50 RPM. So we're not using the momentum from the pedal. We have to actually push against and using the resistance to the hill a lot more. So it's almost like if you're in the gym, you can squat fast and it might seem easy, or you can slow it right down and go to a box squat, and you've really got to drive out the bottom and get that torque strength as well, or low end strength in the gym case as well.
So torque being lower cadence. So you're doing a lot of lower cadence training with these endurance athletes on the track, and so they're using lower cadence, you think, on the climbs now?
Yep. Yeah, I think we're seeing them more. The old tracker used to spin a smaller gear, and they would pedal at 130 RPM on the track, 140 RPM on the track. That's come back a bit to 120, 115 in some cases. And so we're seeing on the climb now, these guys are more comfortable pedaling at 80, 85 RPM on the climb, where previously it was at 95, 90, 95, sometimes a little bit more, and doing it that way.
So I think that's really good information for a lot of our listeners out there, because I think it can be kind of confusing, to pick which type of cadence suits you best. And the way I always explain it to people is like, there's no good cadence or bad cadence. All cadences are good, and they all have their application in the right time and scenario. And, what's interesting is that what you're saying is, these riders are using these different tools that they've built and applying them in the sport in different scenarios. So a more muscular athlete, like we're talking about coming from the track, is more comfortable at 80 RPM because they have a little bit more control of their muscular system. They're using their muscular system a little bit more dominantly than they are their aerobic system. Whereas at 100 RPM or something like that, it's all aerobics. And so what's the difference in somebody who's physiologically, Matt, better at 80 RPMs versus 100 RPMs? What makes those two athletes different?
It's probably just comes down to an efficiency of movement. So the 100 RPM rider, they could have similar VO2s, for an example, but the 100 RPM might be more efficient working for that slightly lower power at a lower heart rate, but pedaling a good RPM, versus a track guy who might be better at a lower heart rate, higher power. So it's kind of like that trade-off of what's your power to work rate relationship, and how efficient are you at being able to move the power for the output from the heart rate, really, essentially, is what's going on in that sense.
Does this have anything to do with how much muscle mass you have?
Yeah, muscle mass will play a role into it, and also your fiber composition as well. So people who might be like, and when we're talking endurance, I mean, people say a type 2 dominant rider, I mean, there's no real full endurance rider that's a full out sprinter. So they might have type 2A, which is like your glycolytic lactate kind of conversion fiber. And they will want to ride at a lower cadence to slow the contraction rate down, so they don't necessarily load up that muscle as much. And they can generate a little bit more force because the muscle's got a longer time under tension, where, say, a slightly less stronger rider in terms of a muscular output might want to ride at a higher RPM and increase the frequency of the contraction and not necessarily hold the muscle under a sustained load for as a longer period as the others.
Holy smokes. If
that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. That's some really amazing information. So we're seeing this more and more, right? Like when we look back at the history of the sport, right, we've seen some riders come through different disciplines and now come onto the road and start doing really well. Obviously, Geraint Thomas won the Tour de France, started out on the track. Mark Cavendish. Like there's a lot of riders out there that have, come from other disciplines, but we're seeing it also from cyclocross now. Of course, Matteo van der Poel, Wout van Aert. There's so many coming from these different, disciplines and just jumping into the road and dominating. So why do you think that is? Obviously, we know, and we just discussed on the track that these trackies are doing different things to just get the most out of their body and then applying it to this different discipline. Do you think the same thing's happening in cyclocross?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you look at even, say, some basic power profiles, I think they're just coming in physiologically different, and they're able to animate the race in a different way and use their strengths a lot more. So, the classic cases, you might see a road power profile, and they might average 240 watts for the ride. But the ride has not a lot of variance in it in terms of, massive power, low power. It's kind of a pretty sustained effort generally. And on the mountain bike, we might see they might only average 230 watts for the ride, but we're seeing massive variance in power shifts throughout the ride. So they're doing 10 seconds at 400 watts, and they might be freewheeling. Then they're doing a 600 watt 5-second burner. And so we're getting these massive variance in the physiological profile. And then when they're coming to the race, they're just able to attack, recover, and really transform up the race and take some of those more diesel-based road guys out of the picture, because their band of how much they can go above or beyond a threshold is limited. And these guys are just coming in fresh, saying, hey, man, this is what we're used to every day of the week. I'm going to use it to my advantage, and I'm going to attack. And I think you see that in cross and mountain bikes reasonably similar in terms of that power distribution. It's on off. And then they're just coming in confident, and they're just like, man, I know you guys can't sit over your threshold more than 10 times in this race for 30 seconds, so I'm just going to do it to you because I can.
Right. And it's funny, we hear a lot of the older guys in the peloton complaining. So do you think that's what it is? It's kind of like that, the person who's been around the group ride for a long time saying like, hey man, no, we ride like this on this particular ride. And you're coming in too disruptive. We don't really like that. It seems like that's kind of the same thing that's happening in pro cycling. Like Van der Poel, Wout van Aert, like Remco, these guys are launching attacks from like unheard distances that are defining the race. And you think it's because they're looking at the power profiles and saying, hey, like, it's to my advantage to just go out and do some crazy stuff, because these guys who have, only been training road can only do this one particular play all day. Do you think that's what it is?
I think so. And I think when you see, like a few documentaries are coming out in some of the road teams, and you can hear some of the directors, and there's a little bit of a historical bias to how some of the road boys ride. And it's like, hey, this is how we do it. We wait, we sit in, we draft, we conserve energy, and then we fire that one shot on the climb. And it's somewhat predictable in some sense, and somewhat smart as well, with saying, hey, that's the best for that athlete. But these young guys are coming in going, man, like, we've come from events where the gun goes and it's full gas from the start. And we want to race hard, and we have to do that, and we have to sustain that, because we can't win a cross race or a mountain bike race any other way. So why would I come to the road and race differently? This is how I'm going to win, and this is what I'm used to. That's my thoughts on it are not 100%.
But we've seen
right,
it. We've seen it. Like if we look at the 2022 racing season, I think racing changed a lot in 2022. We look at how the Tour de France was won, right, with Vingegaard and Roglic attacking Pogacar in a super unconventional way, just draining his glycogen all day, breaking him down, and then cracked him on the final climb, right? Like, when's the last time we saw something like that? I can't remember.
Never. And it's phenomenal. I mean, the basic premise of cycling, right, is so cool, because it's making someone do something else in your favor. And that's the whole premise of how you want to win a race, right? It's like, I'm going to sit in and I'm going to bluff, or I'm going to smash you, but I'm going to use you to get the best result for me. And it's kind of, that's the way that it's set up in some sense. And you're seeing riders now and teams probably shifting a little bit and saying, hey, we can use these riders in this way to expose and isolate that rider and force them to use up, these riders, and change the tactics. And I think we've seen it shift massively in the last, 15 years. We've had kind of the blue postal train came through and rode a certain way, and they just rode tempo all day and blew everyone off the wheels. And Ineos, to an extent, did that as well. And then you've got Jumbo coming in and going, well, we've got Wout, who could probably win the Tour one day. He's that bloody good. And we'll use him as cyclocross sense and just get him going off the front and just yo-yoing everyone else. And then we'll send Roglic, because he can climb like a demon, up the side, and let Vingegaard follow Pogacar and expose the weaknesses. And I think with these riders coming from different disciplines, you're seeing people being exposed a lot more frequently than what we have in the past.
When we look at like the core things that are like, not core things, the core abilities that these new style of athletes are bringing to the table, above and beyond like just being able to accelerate a lot and being able to ride easier, what are the core abilities that you think these riders are bringing, these omni riders are bringing to the road game?
Yeah, I think that they're just bringing a different skill set. I think that's a massive one, and I think we see it a lot, especially in some of the descents. Like the skills they're bringing from cross and mountain bike and track, where they're used to bumping shoulders, line selection super critical, maintenance of speed through corners is super critical in a mountain bike and a cross scenario. They're coming onto these descents and they're just able to pick a line, hold the bike a little truer through the corner and maintain speed. And so they're bringing these skill sets that are just transforming the race and pushing it in boundaries that it wasn't necessarily done. And we're seeing, I think the Tour de France was a good example of Pidcock. There's an amazing video where he just rails the corner on the outside and he's going, 5-6K an hour quicker than the road guys. And that's starting to transform across, and these guys are just getting freaked out, the road boys, because they're like, man, this is so different. Because the mountain bike boys and cross boys are seeing a line three corners ahead of them, and they're just straight lining and hitting it so hard. And I think that's changing. And then even the way they're riding in the bunch, they're happy to move around a little bit and take some knocks, and it's kind of pushing people that aren't probably as confident a little bit further to the back and putting them on the back foot from the get-go as well. So I think there's a lot of that bike skill stuff that, you'd call probably the soft skills that we don't talk about a lot, but that they've developed in these other areas that transfer across so well.
Well, there's a whole stress component to that as well, right? Like being comfortable, like you mentioned it, like bumping into people in the group and kind of navigating through the chaos. If you're the type of rider who's all stressed out about that all day, like it's absolutely going to affect your performance, because the stress will just drain you. And so these younger riders, these omni riders, are able to kind of come in and just flow through the whole race, and then just kind of like the interesting thing is the way they attack. It's like when they light it up, like they just light it up. Like they're just on like a Sunday ride with their buddies, like just launching it up whatever climb. It's like, it's so exciting to watch, but also so from a performance standpoint, so fascinating to see riders performing at such a high level. And I think a lot of it comes down to that, just that comfort on the bike aspect, like you mentioned, right? They're just so comfortable being able to get in position, being able to navigate through all the chaos and just light it up for all of us to see. It's just been amazing. So you mentioned a couple of core things there, right? They're bringing a new skill set. They're better at bike handling. They're more relaxed in the bunch. Is there anything else?
No, I mean, I think that's like, aside from the physiological difference they're bringing from maybe having a greater variance in their training, I think that the second thing they bring across is that skill set. And then and like we discussed multiple times, and there's that mindset as well of, the flag drops, the race starts kind of thing.
So we're looking at the evolution now of sport, and it's clear that, we've made big jumps this year, but the top level of the sport is the example, and everything kind of below it is to follow, or, this is also where a lot of the innovation happens. So if you're a young rider, or you're somebody on the local scene and you're looking to win races and improve your performance, what can we take from what's happening at the top level of sport right now and apply on the local scene to, either make a big difference in our training system, or like get out there and get some surprising results in a race? Like, what can we take from there and apply in our local races?
Yeah, that's that's the biggest discussion happening in the sport at the moment, right from the junior level through your development phases. How do you do it? And I personally think what we can learn from the top guys in the sport is, don't isolate yourself off to one discipline yet. I think utilize other disciplines for training tools. And it can be as simple as, you're a young kid, you're on the road bike, that's your passion, that's what you want to follow. Great. Hey, maybe get a mountain bike and have a little bit of fun on that and develop some skills. But also, if you've got a hard interval session, you might have 10 by 1 minute on, 1 minute off. You can go do them on a hill on the mountain bike, and you're in the mud and you're having a bit of fun, and you're still going to get the physiological shift. It's still going to work the body it needs to be worked, but you're just doing it in a slightly different modality. You have maybe slightly different torque profile, which will benefit you, but it's enjoyable. And I think that's a real interesting case of just saying, hey, if this is my passion, that's cool, but what can I think of to the left or the right that can help support that in terms of riding a cross race or a mountain bike race? I think the fascinating one's gravel. I think that's got a really, really interesting place that I think we're going to learn more about over the next few years of what physiologically it's doing to people and how they can transition through. And we've seen a little bit of it with Keegan at the moment, but I think it's going to be a fascinating window to watch as who comes through from there to again impact, say, the pro road guys, and what we can use in that sense and for young guys on the local scene to develop as well, to come through stronger and more well-rounded bike riders.
Interesting. I think for me with the gravel scene is it's more of just a platform to compete. There's less and less racing in America. Like, criteriums are not necessarily the best breeding ground for world tour level athletes, even though like every world tour race pretty much ends in some sort of criterium. You need the skills to be able to survive. It's just that it's not. It doesn't allow the world tour level riders to display all of their abilities, because they can be a little bit one dimensional. So that's what's to your point, interesting about gravel is it's a platform to show everybody your sweet tricks. So it will be interesting. It will definitely be interesting to see what comes from it. I agree with you 100% there. But let's go a little bit deeper on the takeaways, right? So I'm a young rider, let's say, or I'm a rider on the local level. I want to work on like being Matteo van der Poel or Wout van Aert. Like, what do I need to do? I need to be good at everything. So where do I start?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. If we knew the answer to that, we would have, 30 Van der Poels and Wout van Aerts and, 100 Marion Vosses going around. But I think the way I look at it, and I guess the approach I take with some of the athletes is, well, hang on, let's first initially work out what are your strengths. So where are they? And figure out what that looks like. And then where are areas, opportunities that we can improve some of those areas that aren't quite so strong. And it's just being honest. So it's like, hey, I've got a really good engine. But as soon as I go over my threshold, I can only hold it for 20 seconds, then I'm toast, and I can't come back from that. Okay, well, what do we need to change with the training for that first and foremost? And can we do it, with another way of cycling? Can we do it with a mountain bike? Can we do it with a cross bike? Hey, I actually not a racer. I don't like racing multiple disciplines on a stem. All right, how about we jump on Zwift and we do it that way? Like, what are the platforms that you can utilize once you know where your strengths and weaknesses are? Well, I don't really like to call them weaknesses, more opportunities. What are your opportunities to improve? Is the key. And I guess a little secret for me was the big one we got preparing for Tokyo was the benefit of Zwift. It was unbelievable in terms of I could have all the girls racing a 30-minute crit. I'd jump on, I'd be in New Zealand, I'd be in Canada, we would race hard. And the power we got out of it was just such a high sustained power, because in Zwift, you stop pedaling, you're at the back. So you actually got to work the whole way through. And yes, there's drafting, but it's not to the same effect. So that became quite a good threshold session as well. So kind of knowing what you want to work on and then not limiting yourself to that one thought of, oh, I've just got to ride the road bike. I've got to go to this hill and do these efforts. Like, vary it up. Even change your effort up. You might have a 4-minute effort to do. Why don't you do 30 seconds hard, 10 seconds easy, 40 seconds hard, 10 seconds easy, until you do your 4 minutes, and just kind of really changing the parameter of what you think is achievable in that sense.
So if you're a great sprinter, work on those longer threshold efforts. You're already good at sprinting. Is this what you're saying? Work on those longer efforts. Try to become more dynamic.
I think becoming more dynamic, like, you've got to always touch the base or what you're good at. You've always got to make sure you keep working on. But if you can support it with a stronger platform in the other areas, like, you can sprint really well from 100 meters out, but you can actually now generate 400 or 500 watts a kilometer out to put yourself in the position to have a good sprint. Then
what would be a good split for somebody, right? Like somebody who's, let's say we've got a good sprinter, they've got 8 hours a week, like most of our clients have, to dedicate to their hobby. What would a good split be to, let's say, focus on the things you're good at and focus on the opportunities, as you said?
Yeah, the opportunities. I mean, if you got 8 hours, you might break that into, say, 4 2-hour rides a week. That's probably the easiest way of doing it. You could say, right, two of those sessions might be on whatever phase you're in building. So it might be strength phase, endurance phase. And then the other 2 sessions, you could do one, which could be multiple sprint phase to help maintain and work on that top end sprint view. And then the one session could be, right, this is going to be an opportunity session where we're going to start to delve into areas I'm not quite good at and put some stress and strain into those systems to develop them. So you could say, hey, 25% might be your strength, 25% might be your work on, and the other 50 is your base foundation work that you're on based in whatever phase you are. And then as the season progresses, that could change a little bit as well.
Really interesting.
I guess it's all I guess contextual to where you are in the season. But the one thing we like to do is, I personally don't subscribe to your standard periodization where you do your endurance, then your strength, then your power. No, I like to work across the spectrum all season round, and we just vary how frequent that occurs in your phase. But you've got to work on the whole power duration all year round, in my personal belief and from what I've seen.
That's fascinating, because I did a podcast with TJ Van Garderen, and obviously we know TJ had a phenomenal career as a rider, and I asked him on the podcast, I said, if you could look back on your career and change anything in terms of your development, what would you change? And he said, man, I would have spent way more time in the gym. I would have trained shorter and harder all year round. And so he's definitely, just validating what you're saying right there, and that there is no kind of need for easy base miles anymore. It's always about working and developing your craft. Of course, there's always a space for, base miles and things like that, but more emphasis on becoming this dynamic athlete all year round. So what does that look like if you're structuring out your year? Because a lot of people are familiar with standard periodization. What does that look like if we're talking about going fast all year? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a hard one. So, I mean, it might be, if we use, say, winter, for example, for North America, and we know we're going into that, that's typically your off seasons. You might have a slight rest, and then you come into it, and you'll still do those endurance miles and those Ks that are base, but we might have 1 or 2 sessions a week where it's a polarized approach. And so you might do your Ks, and then 2 sessions a week or 1 session a week is hard, short, sharp intensities. And it could be anywhere from 5-second seated efforts to 10-second sprints to minute efforts. And it's using multiple short, sharp efforts. And we might put a few more in than what we normally would in terms of the volume. But you might go from 10 reps, it might be 20 spread out across the session to still develop the aerobic system, but also make sure we're mainly on that top end. So it's never taking that hard intensity effort out of the build wherever you are in the season. And then we could cut the hours down a little bit to allow for that recovery from the session. So it might be the weekends, it might be a 3-hour ride, a 4-hour ride, and your base endurance case, getting the mitochondrial shifts, so getting that efficiency of movement. Then it might be Monday off. Tuesday could be a short 2-hour ride where we bump the wattage up and we're working at the top end of that aerobic zone. And then Wednesday we could do a hard interval session. So you've kind of double-edged a higher intensity aerobic session with a high intensity interval session, and then that combined will place a greater overall strain on the aerobic system as well. And then Thursday might be active recovery. Friday we get ready for the weekend. And it could be something like that, for example.
And so from a feeling perspective, right, what could I expect to feel different? Like, what's the difference in how I'm going to feel if I do this traditional approach, traditional periodization, versus this dynamic approach that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think you might just, if you do the traditional sense, you might feel that training just becomes, you feel like it takes longer to feel strong and fit and ready to go. And you'll just feel the body go through that transition of, I can start to train again, or I can string days back together. And it just seems to be a drawn out process where if you shorten it and maybe intensify it or change it and make it a little bit more dynamic, then you might find that you feel you get into shape a lot quicker and your body is able to tolerate more shifts and changes easier and faster than the traditional sense.
So in some regards, like, you're going to have to go through the hard stuff. You're going to have to feel like crap at some point. So you might as well just get it out of the way sooner rather than later. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's also not losing that hard work that you've worked on in the season, because it's like you've worked really hard, you've done all these sessions, you've done all these races, you've fine-tuned the body, and then you go to an off-season, you don't do anything, and then you spend the next 6 weeks just riding easy. And then you've got to almost start back at square one again to reintegrate all that hard intensity stuff. So it's like, why not just do that from the get-go? And it doesn't have to be as frequent or as hard as what it was in season, but it's still there. So when you do go to kick onto it, you're actually already at a better place to move on and hopefully push the performance as well.
Well, I think a lot of athletes were doing that because they wanted to rest, right? How does this more dynamic approach affect fatigue on an annual basis?
Yeah, it takes a while. To be fair, you've got to have a reasonably good training history behind you, or you've just got to be smart with how you program it through the year. So there's still that added advantage of, you could say, if you're just going back into base miles or traditional, you might only have a 2-week break and knowing you've got a little bit of time to build up. But if you're going for a more intense, you could say, hey, look, we can actually afford to have a 3-week break because we know how quick we can actually turn you around. And what we've seen from a fatigue point of view is, yeah, we are seeing probably greater TSS or greater stress index scores on the athlete day to day, but it's about then understanding and chatting to that athlete, well, hang on, what are their limitations in terms of stress that they can handle, and do we just need to make sure we factor in a little bit more rest and then cut back some of the training time? And I know it sounds quite counterintuitive to do less, but if you do less with greater quality, then from what I've seen in my experience, we come out with a greater result at the end of the day. So we're getting a higher quality of training, we get a better quality of rest, so we're getting better adaptation, and then that's going to equate to a greater performance, rather than maybe a traditional sense where you might just get a slow burn, dull ache feeling in your legs every day for a long period of time, and then you got to go to some races and get dropped. You've got to go and do some efforts and hurt and ramp it up that way as well. But I guess the caveat is it's not one for everyone. It's kind of who you are as an athlete as well, and what you prefer, and how you've been trained in the past as well.
Well, what we're seeing at the top level of sport is just what you've described, right? Is, the best guys are not coming into the races like needing to race 7 or 8 races to be on the podium or be in there. They might not be in their top form on the first race, but they're in the races, and I think that's probably due to the way the top athletes are training. And so if we can take that from the highest level of sport and bring it to people of all ability levels and walks of life and different goals, then we'll have faster athletes all around. And I also think that the way athletes are training, the types of intervals that they're doing, these like race simulation type of intervals almost are evolving as well. And I think if we kind of take these concepts and teach them to regular people, like not professional riders, that their ability to apply these intervals that they do to the sport is much easier. Do you have any experience in doing things like that, more dynamic style training that simulate races that, kind of athletes can take and apply directly to what they do in their sport?
In terms of different types of sports? So like going from cycling and applying it to running, or vice versa?
No. Let's say like, you've got a particular race you're preparing for, right? Like I did a podcast, I think, with Nielsen Paulus before he was 4th place at Worlds last year in 2021. And he's like, man, I knew there was going to be this big hill. And so I was just doing these intervals specifically for this hill, right? So like a specific interval for a race, right? And so do you think like there's benefit in amateur cyclists doing these types of specific intervals for an event that will apply directly to the event that they want to do?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the key to training is specificity, right? You got to train what you're wanting to race and what you're wanting to do. And I don't think the caveat there is making sure as an amateur athlete that you don't just limit yourself to those types of intervals only. And you say, right, I'm only going to do this hill rep, and I'm only going to do this because this is the one hill that's going to count in the race, because you've got to wait another year for that race, and you might have put your whole season on it, and you're not like getting paid to do it. You're paying to do it. So it's like making sure, yes, you do some specific efforts for that, and then utilizing other intervals as well to help support that, but also make sure we don't miss out on that other end of the power curve or the power spectrums, which are what we're wanting to develop as well. So I guess some examples we've had of that is there might be, we've had some Gran Fondos where we know it finishes on a strong hill. And so we've got the person to go out and do some multiple reps of climbing for 10 to 15 minutes, varying pace, seated, standing efforts to get used to what the demand might be. But then equally, we've gone back and in some of the earlier sessions done really hard intervals in the middle of a ride. So they might do an hour and then they've got to do some threshold efforts and some sprints to simulate, stress the body there so they get to a fatigue state, and then they do the climb to kind of replicate what the race might be. And then if that race doesn't work out for them, they've still worked on this other area that we can transform to another event quite comfortably, and they can still feel that they can push and be competitive in that as well.
It sounds like we keep coming back over and over and over again to the same thing, right? Like if you want to develop as a rider, you really need to work on being multidimensional. We talked about, in the beginning of the podcast, we talked about what these track guys were doing, how they overcame this kind of getting dropped on climbs by transitioning from higher cadence to their advantage, that muscular system dominance, and that's why they're able to make it over climbs now. And then we talked about how all of these riders from different sports are able to apply these unique power profiles that they build in their unique disciplines and then come into the road game and apply that and disrupt this traditional style of road cycling. And then we talked a little bit about, how all of this can apply to regular everyday people's cycling and how maybe working on a much wider variety of kind of skills and abilities will not only like make you a better rider, but also make your training more fun because you're constantly working on different things. And so I think there was a lot of information, a really insightful podcast. Matt, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your amazing knowledge with all of us.
Yeah, no, thanks, Zach. I really enjoyed it. And it's always great speaking about this stuff. And, it always challenges me to think differently as well. So great opportunity.
So that's a wrap for this episode of the Team EF Coaching Performance Podcast. Don't forget, if you're interested in working with Coach Matt Shallcrass and improving your cycling skill set and developing some new abilities, you absolutely can. Go ahead and head to teamefcoaching.com and schedule a consultation with us today. We look forward to chatting with you. If you're not already subscribed to the Team EF Coaching Performance Podcast, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And don't forget, ask us any questions you want answers to on social media and we'll try to get to them. That's it for now. Take care, everybody.